The Corrupted. In the desolate town of Glenmore, nestled amidst gnarled woods and shrouded in perpetual mist, there stood an old manor, its decaying facade an eerie silhouette against the moonlit sky. Legends whispered of its former glory. Now it was lost to time and neglect, echoing the tragic tale of the family that once thrived within its walls. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones, weaving stories of crimson lips that uttered curses and twisted smiles that foretold doom upon any who dared to venture near. The manor's grounds lay unkempt, overrun by wild thorns that snaked around rusted gates, a warning to the curious and the foolhardy alike. Some claimed to have glimpsed figures flitting past dust-covered windows, their laughter an unsettling melody that echoed through the night. Others swore by the sight of ghostly apparitions drifting along the corridors, their spectral forms adorned with those haunting crimson lips, frozen in sinister grins. As the town's clock tower tolled midnight, casting elongated shadows that danced in macabre rhythms, a chilling fog crept from the forest, cloaking the manor in a shroud of obscurity. It was said that those who crossed the threshold of the manor were never seen again, swallowed by its malevolent embrace, their fates sealed by the allure of those cursed crimson lips and twisted smiles that promised secrets beyond mortal comprehension. Despite the tales of doom, there were still those who sought to uncover the mysteries hidden within the walls of the manor. Some hungered for the power and knowledge that was said to be locked away, while others were simply drawn by the thrill of danger. One such group of intrepid explorers crept through the thorny gate, their footsteps muffled by the misty silence that enveloped them. As they crossed the threshold, the air grew thick with a palpable sense of foreboding. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet, and the faint echoes of whispered voices drifted through the halls. The group pressed on, their nerves taut with anticipation and fear. They soon discovered that the legends were not just mere tales spun by the townsfolk. As they roamed deeper into the manor, the walls pulsed with a malevolent energy, and the temperature dropped drastically, as if the very air itself were trying to force them out, but they persisted, driven by their desire for adventure and discovery. As they passed through a narrow corridor, the group suddenly found themselves in a grand chamber, its walls adorned with ancient paintings that seemed to come alive in the flickering candlelight. At the center of the room stood a large pedestal, upon which rested an ornate chest, its surface intricately carved with mysterious symbols. Without hesitation, the group approached the chest, eager to uncover its secrets. As they pried the lid open, a sudden gust of wind shook the room, extinguishing all but one of the candles. The chamber was plunged into darkness, and the sound of sinister laughter echoed through the space. The group froze in terror, their eyes wild with fear as they attempted to make out any shapes in the darkness. Suddenly, the lid of the chest sprang open, revealing a glowing object within its depths. With a gasp, the group reached out to touch it, but as their fingers grazed the surface, they felt a surge of energy coursing through their bodies. The glowing object pulsed with an otherworldly power that left them dizzy and disoriented. In the darkness, they could hear whispered incantations and the feeling of a cold, clammy hand on their shoulder. It was then that they realized their mistake. They had not come there seeking knowledge or adventure, but rather they had been lured into a trap by the very entity that dwelled within the manor's walls. The group had played right into its hands, and now they were at its mercy. As they struggled to free themselves from the grasp of the evil entity, they felt it probing their minds, searching for any weaknesses to exploit. One by one, they succumbed to its dark influence, their bodies racked with pain as they were consumed by the entity's insatiable hunger for power. In the end, there was nothing left of the group but a pile of lifeless bodies, drained of all vitality. The wicked entity cackled with glee, reveling in the destruction it had wrought upon the foolish mortals. But little did it know, one member of the group had managed to escape its clutches. A lone survivor, Gary, fled the manor with the glowing object in tow, determined to uncover the truth behind its power. That object was not a mere artifact, but rather a gateway to a realm of unspeakable horrors. As Gary delved deeper into the object's mysteries, he found himself constantly tormented by visions of twisted, nightmarish landscapes and demonic entities beyond comprehension. But still, he pressed on, driven by an insatiable curiosity that threatened to consume the survivor whole. In the end, however, it was not the malevolent entity or the horrors of the other realm that led to Gary's downfall. It was his own hubris, his belief that he could wield the power of the object for his own ends. Delving deeper into its secrets twisted and corrupted Gary's mind, and soon he found himself enthralled by the very entity that he'd sought to destroy. Gary became a vessel for the fiend, his body and soul a mere puppet for its dark desires. He used his newfound power to wreak havoc on the mortal realm, summoning demons and unleashing unspeakable horrors upon the world. But even as the world burned and Gary reveled in his newfound abilities, a glimmer of hope remained. A group of brave adventurers banded together, determined to stop Gary and the entity once and for all. For many long years the battle raged, with Gary and his minions growing stronger with each passing day. But finally, with the help of ancient magics and powerful artifacts, the adventurers managed to strike the killing blow. The entity was banished back to the realm from whence it came, and Gary was left to face the consequences of his actions. With the entity gone, he was no longer in control of his own mind and body, forced to witness the destruction he had wrought upon the world. In the end, Gary's fate was far worse than death, for he lived out the rest of his days as a shell of his former self, haunted by the guilt and remorse of the atrocities he'd committed. But through the adventurer's sacrifice, the world was saved, and the malevolent entity was banished once and for all. The survivors of the battle, though scarred by the horrors they had witnessed, went on to live their lives with newfound purpose and determination. They vowed to protect the world from other dark forces that might seek to destroy it, and to never forget the lessons they had learned in the battle against the malevolent entity and Gary, who had succumbed to its power. But even as the adventurers celebrated their hard-fought victory, a shadow loomed over them. Unbeknownst to them, the malevolent entity had not been banished back to its own realm, but had instead found a new host within one of the survivors. At first, the possession was subtle. Lee manifested strange behavior, speaking in tongues, and exhibiting supernatural abilities. But as time went on, the possession grew stronger, and Lee's body warped and twisted into something monstrous. The team knew that they had to act fast if they wanted to prevent another catastrophe. They banded together once again, this time seeking out powerful magical artifacts that they hoped would banish the entity for good. Their journey took them across treacherous terrain and into dark and forgotten ruins, but finally they found what they were looking for. An ancient tome said to hold the key to defeating the evil entity once and for all. With shaking hands, the lead adventurer, Stephen, opened the tome, its pages crackling with ancient power. He searched through the pages, carefully scanning each word until he found the ritual he was looking for. The ritual was complex and required specific ingredients that were difficult to obtain, but the team was determined and would do whatever it took to rid Lee of the fiend's grip. They spent weeks gathering the necessary materials, traveling far and wide to obtain rare components. Finally, they stood before their possessed comrade, ready to perform the ancient ritual. As the ritual began, Lee writhed and screamed in agony, but the team pressed on, reciting the words from the ancient tome with unwavering determination. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the room, and Lee let out a final scream before collapsing to the ground unconscious. When the light faded, the group looked down at Lee's body, seeing that it had been transformed back to its former self. His eyes fluttered open, staring in confusion, not remembering anything that had transpired since the possession. The adventurers breathed a sigh of relief, grateful that they had successfully banished the entity back to its own realm. They gathered around their now healed companion, offering words of comfort and support. But as they prepared to leave the ruins, Stephen couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. He felt as though they were being watched, and a sense of foreboding washed over him. As the group made their way through the ruins, they soon discovered that their feelings of unease were justified. A horde of shadowy figures appeared out of nowhere, wielding dark magic and weapons that could only have been forged in the fires of the underworld. A fierce battle ensued, with the adventurers using their newfound knowledge and skills to fight off the malevolent beings. It soon became clear that they were outnumbered and outmatched. One by one, the survivors fell, until only Stephen remained standing. But Stephen refused to give up. He fought on, his weapons glinting in the dim light of the ruins. The dark mob was relentless, but Stephen seemed almost invincible, his strength coming from a place deep within. It was a long and grueling battle, but eventually Stephen emerged victorious. The shadowy figures retreated into the darkness, defeated, and the ruins were once again silent. Exhausted and battered, Stephen stumbled out of the ruins and collapsed onto the ground outside. He lay there for a moment, catching his breath, attempting to make sense of what had just happened. As he lay there, he was suddenly aware of a strange presence nearby. He sat up slowly, looking around for the source of the feeling. That's when he saw it. A shrouded figure, standing at the edge of the forest, watching him with glowing red eyes. Stephen knew that this was not the end of his journey. He'd defeated the malevolent force that had possessed his companion, but there were more dark forces at work that needed to be stopped. With a heavy heart, Stephen got to his feet and walked towards the figure, aware that this was the beginning of a new battle, one that would be more dangerous and deadly than the last. Stephen had the strength and the will to face whatever obstacles came his way. He was a warrior, and nothing would stop him from achieving his goal. As Stephen drew closer to the figure, he felt a surge of power spark within him. He could defeat this enemy, no matter how terrifying it may seem. And so, with a fierce determination and a heart full of courage, Stephen charged towards the figure, ready to face whatever lay ahead. This was his destiny, and he was ready to fulfill it, no matter the cost. The figure let out a blood-curdling scream as Stephen charged ahead, its eyes narrowing as it prepared to launch its attack. Stephen barely had time to react before the figure leapt towards him, claws bared and fangs gleaming in the moonlight. With a swift motion, Stephen unsheathed his sword and parried the figure's attack, sending it skittering backwards. The two circled one another warily, each waiting for the other to make the first move. It was a tense moment, fraught with uncertainty. But Stephen knew that he couldn't afford to hesitate. Lunging forward, he attacked the figure with all his might. The fiend fought back with equal ferocity, its movements fluid and graceful as it dodged and weaved around Stephen's attacks. But Stephen was persistent, and soon he gained the upper hand. With a final decisive blow, Stephen struck the figure, and it fell to the ground with a dull thud, its body disintegrating into smoke and ash until it dissipated into the night air. For a moment there was silence. Stephen stood panting, sword still at the ready, unsure if this was truly the end of his journey. But as the minutes ticked by, it was apparent that the darkness had been vanquished, at least for now. Stephen breathed a sigh of relief, feeling the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. He'd faced impossible odds and come out victorious. But even as Stephen savored his triumph, he knew that there would be more battles to come. The forces of darkness were always lurking, waiting for an opportunity to strike. And so, with a newfound sense of purpose and determination, Stephen set off once more into the unknown, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The Corrupted, Part 2. As Stephen journeyed deeper into the darkness, his senses heightened, alert for any sign of danger. He moved quickly and quietly, his sword ever at the ready, scanning his surroundings for any hint of movement. A shadowy figure appeared before him, its eyes glowing with malevolence. Stephen recognized the signs of a demon and braced himself for the attack, steadying his nerves as the demon charged towards him. But this was no ordinary opponent. Stephen sensed the sheer strength and brutality of the demon as it launched a barrage of attacks. The battle raged on, each combatant pushing the other to their limits. Stephen's muscles screamed in protest as he fought to stay alive, but his determination never wavered. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Stephen saw his chance. With a decisive blow, he lashed the demon and watched as its body withered, fading into oblivion. Stephen caught his breath, acutely aware that this was not the end. There was always another adversary lurking in the shadows. So he pressed on, his sword glowing with the fire of his victories. He saw something glimmering in the distance. Curiosity getting the better of him, he stood and walked towards it, his sword still at the ready. It was a small silver key lying on the ground. Picking it up, Stephen felt a peculiar energy course through his veins. The key was important, and it would unlock something powerful. But what and where? Stephen decided to keep the key, tucking it safely into his pocket. After taking a moment to rest and recover, it would be time to move on. His journey was far from over. A group of bandits emerged from the bushes surrounding Stephen with swords drawn. He stood, not nearly as rested as he needed to be, but ready to fight once again. Before the mob could strike, a shape appeared, holding them back with a wave of one hand. It was a woman, dressed in a long, flowing robe. Her hair was jet black, and her eyes glimmered with an otherworldly light. She was a sorceress, but unlike any he'd ever seen. The sorceress approached him, a small smile on her lips. "You have done well," she said, her voice smooth and melodic. "But there are greater challenges ahead. Challenges that you cannot face alone." Stephen narrowed his eyes, skeptical of the sorceress's intentions. "What do you want?" he asked, gripping tightly to his sword. The sorceress's smile widened. "I seek a companion," she said. "Someone strong and skilled, who can aid me in a great quest." Stephen considered her offer for a moment. He'd been traveling alone for a while, facing danger and hardship without anyone to rely on. Perhaps it was time to accept some help. "What is this quest?" Stephen asked. The sorceress's eyes gleamed. "To find the lost city of El Dorado," she replied. "A place of untold riches and power. With your strength and my magic, we could conquer it together." Stephen felt a thrill of excitement at the prospect of such a journey. He'd heard legends of El Dorado, but never dared to dream of finding it himself. But could he trust this mysterious sorceress? Before he could decide, the sorceress spoke again. "I understand your hesitation," she said, "but I promise you, I will not lead you astray. Together, we will uncover the secrets of El Dorado and claim its treasures for ourselves." Stephen weighed his decision. The idea of a partner was appealing, tempting even, and the promise of untold riches was too great to ignore. "I accept your proposal," he said resolutely. "Let's find this lost city together." The sorceress's smile beamed, and she held out a hand. "Excellent. We shall begin our journey at dawn. Rest well, my friend. We have much to do." Stephen settled back into his bedroll, unable to temper the sense of excitement and anticipation. The road ahead would be dangerous, but with the sorceress by his side, he could face anything. He drifted off to sleep with visions of gold and jewels dancing in his head. The next morning, the sorceress woke Stephen as the sun began to rise. She had already packed up their camp and was tending to her horse. Stephen rubbed the sleep from his eyes and joined her. As they rode out into the wilderness, the sorceress explained her plan. She had spent years studying ancient texts and deciphering clues to the location of El Dorado. She'd finally pieced together a map and believed she was close to finding the lost city. The comrades traveled for days through rugged terrain, encountering all manner of obstacles along the way: fierce beasts, treacherous cliffs, and unexpected storms. But the sorceress's magic proved invaluable, helping them overcome every challenge. Finally, they arrived at the foot of a mountain that the sorceress believed held the entrance to El Dorado. They climbed for hours, their muscles aching and their breath coming in short gasps. But as they reached the top, they saw that it was worth it. A great stone temple lay before them, its threshold guarded by intricate carvings and ancient symbols. The sorceress approached the entrance, her eyes glowing with excitement. She chanted, the language too foreign for Stephen to understand. The symbols on the door glowed, and the entryway creaked open, revealing a dark and mysterious tunnel. Together, the two stepped inside, the sorceress leading the way with a small torch. They walked for what seemed like hours, the only sound their footsteps echoing off the walls. But finally, they came to a vast chamber, filled with treasures beyond their wildest dreams. Gold and jewels glittered in the torchlight, piles of ancient artifacts stacked high against the walls. Stephen couldn't believe his eyes. He'd never seen so much wealth in one place. But as they approached the treasure, a sense of unease settled over them. The sorceress stopped in her tracks and turned to Stephen. "Remember," she warned, "this treasure is cursed. Anyone who takes it will suffer the consequences." Stephen hesitated, unsure whether he wanted to proceed. But the lure of riches was too great, so he continued towards the treasure. When they reached out to touch the gold, an ominous rumbling shook the chamber. The walls began to crumble, and the ground beneath their feet gave way. Stephen and the sorceress fell into darkness, the sound of their screams echoing throughout the chamber. When they landed, they found themselves in a pit of snakes that slithered all around them. Stephen tried to fight them off, but there were too many. The sorceress cast spell after spell, but it was of no use. They were trapped. Days turned to weeks and the snakes continued to torment them. Stephen was covered in bites, and the sorceress had grown weak from using so much magic to try and fend off the serpents. As they lay there close to giving up, they heard a faint whisper in the air. Stephen strained to listen, and slowly the words began to take shape. "Only one of you can be saved," the voice whispered. "The other must stay and suffer the curse." Stephen and the sorceress stared at each other, both knowing what had to be done. They couldn't both be saved, so, without a word, they both began to fight. The sorceress used the last of her magic to summon a pack of wolves to attack the snakes, while Stephen fought with all his might, wielding his sword with precision and skill. It was a fierce battle, and for a moment it seemed as though they could win. But just as they began to hope, the ground shook once more. The snakes retreated, and a dark figure appeared before them. It was the curse itself, in physical form. "Only one may leave with the treasure," it hissed. "The other will remain trapped here forever." The companions exchanged a fleeting glance. Without hesitation, the sorceress cast a spell that transported Stephen back to the surface world, along with the cursed treasure. As Stephen glimpsed back down into the pit, he witnessed the sorceress still fighting against the curse. Her eyes locked with his, and she gave a small nod. Summoning a powerful spell that sealed the entrance to the pit, she trapped herself inside forever. Horrified, Stephen left the tomb with a heavy heart, knowing that he had left someone behind to suffer for the sake of riches. The curse had won, and it would continue to claim the lives of those who dared to seek its treasure. But for Stephen, the memory of the sorceress's sacrifice would stay with him, and her bravery and selflessness would be remembered forever. Stephen made his way back to civilization, guilt gnawing at his insides. He'd escaped with the treasure, but at what cost? The sorceress remained trapped, alone, and cursed for all eternity. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, but Stephen could not forget the sorceress. He thought of her every day, and the guilt weighed heavily on his conscience. He had to do something, anything, to make amends for what he had done. Stephen set out on a new quest, traveling far and wide, seeking out any magical artifact or charm that might break the curse that had befallen the sorceress. After months of searching, he finally found what he was looking for, a rare and eloquent antiquity said to be capable of breaking any curse. But the artifact was heavily guarded by a group of ruthless bandits who would fight to the death. Undeterred, Stephen gathered his courage and, with his trusty sword in hand, charged towards the bandits. The battle was grueling, but eventually, Stephen emerged victorious. He claimed the artifact, wasting no time as he rushed back to the cursed pit, where the sorceress was trapped. He arrived, the artifact in hand, hoping it was powerful enough to break the curse. Channeling all his energy into the relic, he recited the ancient incantations. The ground quaked, and the entrance to the pit burst open. The sorceress emerged, her expression heavy with gratitude. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered words of thanks. The curse had been broken, and the sorceress was finally free. She embraced Stephen, thanking him for his bravery. Without him, she would have remained trapped in the pit forever. Stephen smiled, a heavy weight lifting from his shoulders. He'd finally made amends for what he had done, and had saved the sorceress's life in the process. From that moment on, he vowed to always use his skills and abilities for good, to help those in need, and make the world a better place. As the companions left the cursed pit, Stephen felt a sense of peace and contentment. He'd made a difference. His actions had truly mattered. He'd never forget the sorceress. She'd taught him lessons of redemption, forgiveness, and compassion. Glancing into the sky, he could only feel a sense of hope and wonder. There were many mysteries to uncover, so many battles to fight, and so many people to help. Stephen decided to take a well-deserved break and rest for a few days in a nearby village. There, he met a beautiful and mysterious woman who caught his eye. She had long, flowing black hair and alluring green eyes that seemed to pierce directly into his soul. Drawn to her, Stephen struck up a conversation. As they talked, he realized that they had a lot in common. Dawn was also an adventurer, and she had traveled to different lands in search of treasure and knowledge. The two chatted late into the night, sharing stories of their travels. Eventually, Stephen realized that Dawn was special, so he asked her to join him on his next adventure. Over the next few days, the pair continued to get to know one another, and Stephen relished the fact that he had finally found someone who understood him completely. The couple set out on their next adventure together, traveling across treacherous mountains and through dense forests. Dawn proved to be a valuable ally, with her sharp wit and quick reflexes. Relying on one another's strengths, Stephen and Dawn faced many quests, but they overcame them as a team. Stephen was falling in love with Dawn. He'd never felt this way, and it scared him. He didn't want to lose her, but he also didn't want to hold her back from her own adventures. One night, as they sat around a campfire, Stephen mustered up the courage to tell Dawn how he felt. To his surprise, Dawn felt the same way. She had been waiting for someone like Stephen her entire life and couldn't believe she'd finally found them. They shared a passionate kiss under the stars, cementing their love, acutely aware that they were meant to be together. Their love only grew stronger as the couple continued their adventures, facing danger and adversity together. Stephen never forgot the lessons taught to him by the sorceress, lessons of redemption, forgiveness, and compassion, and he used them to help those he encountered along the way. Stephen and Dawn grew old together, their love standing the test of time. They continued to explore the world, gaining wisdom and experience as they aged. For as many battles as they had fought, the couple knew that there were still so many mysteries to uncover and people to help, but they would face them together. Their love, the nucleus of the strength that would help them overcome anything. Love's warrior. My eyes strained against the thick, inky darkness of my room, the only source of light a thin sliver seeping through the open door from the hallway. It barely illuminated the outline of my roommate's body, but beyond that, there was nothing but an endless void. Dampness clung to my skin and hair like a cold, misty fog. It was suffocating, and I could taste its metallic tang on my tongue. As I stretched out my hand in front of me, it disappeared into the blackness. The familiar objects in my room took on a menacing presence. My desk loomed like a hulking beast in the corner, and the posters on my wall seemed to mock me with their distorted shapes. Every inch of the room felt like it was closing in on me, making it hard to breathe. This wasn't just darkness. It was like being swallowed by an eternal night. Lying in bed, I was suddenly aware of a presence looming over me. My muscles tensed and my heart raced as I struggled to move, but I found myself paralyzed. A distant voice hummed in the background, growing louder and more sinister with each passing second. The air in the room grew colder, and I felt a weight on my chest as if someone was sitting on top of me. Panic set in as I tried to scream for help, but no sound escaped my lips. That's when I saw them, a pair of glowing red eyes staring intently at me from just inches away. They seemed to bore into my soul, searching for something. I couldn't look away, even though every fiber of my being screamed to do so. As the eyes drew closer, a low whisper echoed in my ear. "You can't escape me." The weight atop me grew heavier, and I knew that whatever was with me was malevolent. It had no intention of letting me go. Just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, my roommate stirred, and the presence vanished. The room returned to its normal temperature, and the voice faded away, leaving behind only a sense of lingering fear and unease. I woke up gasping for air, my body soaked in sweat. My roommate, Missy, lay sound asleep in the other bed, unaware of the terror I had just experienced. But even as I turned to her for comfort, I knew she would be of no help. For days I was haunted by a malevolent presence with glowing red eyes. Every time I slept, it felt like it was suffocating me, its presence looming closer and closer until I thought I would be consumed by darkness. Sleep became a luxury, and even during the day I found myself plagued by terrifying nightmares. Missy noticed the change in me, but how could I explain something so inexplicable? One night, as I tried to fall asleep, I saw Missy standing at the foot of my bed. Her eyes were open but empty, and behind her glowed those fiery red orbs. As I reached out to shake her awake, a jolt of electricity shot through me and I recoiled in shock. The presence emerged from behind Missy, showing itself for all its wickedness. Tears blurred my vision as I struggled to break the intense gaze that held me captive. My hands shook as I fumbled for something, anything to anchor me in reality. And then I saw it, a photo of my family on the bedside table. Their smiling faces brought a wave of warmth and love over me, and I clung to their image, as if it were my lifeline. Their names echoed in my mind, as I begged for their protection against the malevolent entity that threatened to consume me. Slowly the red eyes faded, and the crushing weight on my chest lifted. My roommate slumped onto the bed beside me, her unconscious body a stark reminder of what had just transpired. But this was not over. The malevolent presence would surely return, and I couldn't continue living in fear. With newfound determination, I delved into research about unholy spirits and how to banish them. I sought advice from experts in the field, desperate for a solution to protect myself and my roommate. It wasn't easy, but finally armed with knowledge and a plan, I performed a ritual to banish the entity from our presence once and for all. I carefully arranged the candles in a circle on the hardwood floor, making sure each one was evenly spaced. Then, I sprinkled a ring of salt around the candles, creating a protective barrier. With trembling hands, I lit each candle and took a deep breath before starting the incantation. As I chanted the ancient words, my voice grew stronger and more confident. But with each passing second, I felt the entity resisting, pushing back with all its might. I refused to give up. I poured every ounce of my being into the ritual, fueled by determination and a sense of duty to protect myself. The room grew colder, and the candles flickered wildly, but I continued to chant with unwavering focus. I felt a surge of power coursing through me. My hands glowed with an otherworldly light, and I knew that I had succeeded in breaking the entity's hold on our room. With one final burst of energy, I let out a primal scream that echoed off the walls. The entity let out a deafening roar, and then vanished. I collapsed onto the floor, exhausted. This was what I was meant to do, to hunt down malevolent spirits and protect the innocent from their grasp. And so began my journey as a paranormal investigator, traveling the world and battling dangerous entities to bring peace to those affected by their presence. It was terrifying at times, but every victory reaffirmed my purpose and gave me a sense of fulfillment unlike any other. Despite my years of training and experience as a spirit hunter, there was one entity that continued to elude me, the one that had plagued my old apartment. I was constantly reminded of it as I traveled from city to city, vanquishing demon after demon. But then a call from an old friend changed everything. She had moved into my old apartment and was now experiencing strange occurrences. It didn't take long for me to realize that the entity had returned, and it was up to me to finally put an end to its reign of terror. Armed with all the knowledge and skills I had acquired over the years, I returned to my old haunt. The moment I stepped foot in the building, I sensed the entity's presence growing stronger. But I refused to let fear consume me. I had faced countless demons since our last encounter, and I was more than ready to face it again. As I made my way up to the apartment, a chill ran down my spine, the wicked energy radiating from within. Every hair on my body stood on end. But backing down was not an option. I was determined to confront it head-on. I reached my friend's door, my hand shaking as I touched the doorknob. The brass was cold against my skin, and I took a deep breath before turning it and pushing the door open. Inside, the room was dark except for flickering candles that lined the walls. Shadows danced around me, making my heart race with fear. But I couldn't let it control me. "Show yourself!" I shouted into the darkness, my voice echoing through the room. For a moment, there was no response. Suddenly, a low growl filled the air, followed by a cold, mocking laugh. The entity had returned, and it was more powerful than ever. My hands clenched into fists as I searched for my only source of protection, a crystal hanging from a leather cord around my neck. It was an onyx stone, given to me by my mother before she passed away. In moments like these, I could almost feel her presence with me. But even with the crystal in hand, I knew it wouldn't be enough. The entity had grown stronger, and I needed to find its weakness if I wanted to banish it from the apartment. Closing my eyes, I focused on my breathing and tried to clear my mind. And then I heard it. A faint whisper, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. The entity was vulnerable to love. I opened my eyes and stepped forward. "I know what you are," I said, my voice steady. "You're nothing but a coward. You feed off people's fears because you're too weak to face your own." The room grew colder as the entity snarled in response, its power pulsing through every corner of the room. But I stood my ground and continued speaking with conviction. "You're afraid of love, aren't you? You're afraid of what it can do, how it can make you vulnerable." With each word, I felt the entity's hold weakening. It snarled, its presence flickering and flashing throughout the room. "You think you're powerful. You think you can control us. Well, you're wrong. Love is stronger than fear. It's stronger than any darkness you can conjure up. It's what gives us hope. It's what keeps us going even when everything else seems lost." As I spoke, the candles in the room flared, but I sensed the entity's power ebbing. I was making progress, so I pressed on. "You can't win against love. You can fight it all you want, but it'll always be there, ready to heal and save. So go ahead. Do your worst. We'll still be here, standing strong, because love is what makes us human." With a final burst of light, the candles blew out, leaving me standing in the darkness. I had won. The evil presence was gone. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling the weight of the battle lift from my shoulders. I turned and walked towards the door, my heart racing with adrenaline and relief. But just as my hand touched the doorknob, I heard a low chuckle behind me. "Well done, mortal," a voice whispered in my ear. "But don't get too comfortable. Other shadows are waiting to claim you." I spun around, but there was no one there, only the empty room, shrouded in darkness. I knew then that my battle was far from over. The entity may have been banished, but its kind still lurked in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. I stood tall and unafraid, my heart filled with love and determination. The darkness had once controlled me, but now I controlled it. As I left the apartment, I felt its presence still lingering, but I no longer feared it. Months passed as I traveled the world, seeking out others who were lost in the darkness. With every person I helped, the entity's grip weakened, but I knew better than to let my guard down. It was always lurking, waiting for its opportunity to strike again. And when it did, I was ready. Love and determination were a powerful shield against its attacks. With each victory, the darkness grew weaker until finally, it seemed to disappear completely. But I remained vigilant, knowing that it could resurface at any moment. And when it did, I would be there to face it head-on, armed with nothing but my unwavering determination and the boundless power of love. For in a world consumed by darkness, it was the only weapon strong enough to bring light back into our lives. As I walked down the street, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in myself. I was a warrior for love, and I was making a difference in the world, one person at a time. But just as I was lost in my thoughts, I heard a low growl coming from the nearby alley. Without hesitation, I pulled out my trusty knife and crept towards the sound. As I neared the entrance to the alley, I saw a dark figure lurking in the shadows. It was a demon, sent by the entity to try and stop me, but I would not be deterred. With a fierce battle cry, I charged toward the demon, my knife raised high. The demon snarled and lunged towards me, but I dodged its attack and thrust my blade deep into its chest. The demon howled in pain, but I did not stop. I kept slicing and stabbing until the creature lay motionless on the ground. Breathing heavily, I wiped the blood from my blade and looked around. But to my horror, I realized that I had been surrounded by a group of demons. They were closing in on me, their glowing eyes filled with malice and hunger. I did not falter. I stood my ground, ready to defend myself with all the strength and courage I possessed. The demons charged towards me, their claws slashing through the air with deadly accuracy. But I was fast and agile, dodging their attacks and striking back with my knife. Soon, the ground was littered with demon corpses, and the survivors retreated into the shadows. With my heart racing and adrenaline still coursing through my veins, I took a deep breath and steadied myself. For I was a true warrior, ready to battle for what was right and just. With my back to the graffiti-covered alley, I gazed ahead toward the unknown challenges that lay in wait. But I refused to let fear consume me. The weight of my blade on my hip and fierce determination in my heart was all I needed. Love and a burning purpose to protect fueled my steps as I marched forward, ready to face any obstacle that dared to stand in my way.